Good morning, everyone. Actually, happy getting to the final few days of April. So happy spring. I know there's a lot going on. This is one of those days where it's early in the morning, but you know how you have Zoom calls very early and then very late at night. And just the topics that we covered in those calls almost changed how my day has been going. And that's not a negative because it kind of caused me to meditate on certain things that I'm thinking now is probably really necessary when you're coming to the end of a month. You know, we are basically fully into spring, and the beginning of May is just a few days away. And 2025 has been filled with, I think, difficult and chaotic circumstances. If you're not experiencing it personally, maybe a friend, a family, a nation, a city, you know, somehow there is just chaos in the environment, and that always leads to a lot of difficulties. And that has been going on even through resurrection season. And we are now, as of today, 50 days away from Pentecost. And the question that I'm asking myself today is the question I'm asking you. What do you need? What do you need? Everybody I spoke to over Zoom and over different uh, types of communication was expressing or trying to express a need. And I'm asking the question seriously. I want you to really think about it. What do you need? You know, can you even articulate it with words? You know, would your need be taken seriously if you expressed it? Would anyone really understand? You know, have you ever been in a situation where you mentioned a need to maybe family or friends and no one reacted or responded? You know, maybe from the outside, it does not seem as if you need anything, or maybe no one actually cares that you do. Nevertheless, God does. God cares about your need. And one of the most intriguing words of Jesus was kind of brought back to me during this resurrection season and resurrection week. And it's where the Lord basically said, the Lord has need. And we know the rest of the need of it. But just Jesus saying, the Lord has need. And it always made me think, you know, because how often do we really think of Jesus, this one sent to rescue and deliver the entire world, as having a need? I mean, why would he express a need of anything when he already has everything, right? So a need, the more I thought about it, is not determined by what we already have, right? Sometimes people, when they're trying to figure out what they need, like they'll go through and inventory their house. A need is not determined by what we already have, right? Or seem to have. But we have kind of, I think that's what we've become. We are people, workplaces do it. They take inventory, you know, at home, you go through everything, you teach your kids, go through your closet, go, let's pull out stuff you don't need, you know. So we're accustomed to just kind of looking at needs that way, something visible, right? Something you don't need that or you need this. But a need is not determined by what you already have or seem to have, but by what God is calling you to. It's personal. It's not really about the things. We may possess many things or little things. Needs have to do with our person, our being. And so that need you can't quite describe, right? That need that the people closest to you don't seem to see is often driven by a divine purpose, not just by some carnal desire. You know, it doesn't matter what it looks like. When you're that need, the way Jesus said need, that was being driven by a divine purpose. Okay. So that need may seem insignificant, foolish, and unnecessary to others, but not to God. Mary, sitting at the feet of Jesus, seemed kind of careless and selfish and frivolous, But Jesus declared it was the one thing needed. Okay. Elijah asking a widow preparing to die in the midst of a famine to supply his need. Think about that. If you've never read that story, go back and read it. Here is a prophet, well known, powerful, can call down things from heaven. But he goes to a widow woman who he knows is preparing to die. And she tells him this. And he's asking her to supply a need in the midst of a famine. That seemed like a useless request, but there was divine purpose in that need. Jesus, shortly before ascending to heaven, told his followers that they needed to stay in Jerusalem and wait until the Holy Spirit came and filled them with power. And we know not every disciple did it, but the ones who did it had an experience and an encounter that was unique to them and would cause them to what? Fulfill their purpose after he was gone to heaven. Ultimately, whatever need Jesus asks of us is actually for our benefit, right? And I was kind of going through my meditation after I'd had these Zoom calls, and two verses came up. And here's one. If you're struggling with difficulties and chaos, and I think a lot of us have this in this first few months of 2025, the first is very well known. Isaiah 41:10, do not be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. And then there's another verse, also well known, Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. And by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. I was speaking to a friend the other day, and we kind of laughed on the phone because I hadn't heard from her in so long. And she started talking about a garden, and of course we can relate to that. But, I just mentioned that we are not perfect. We're beautiful. God didn't make us to be perfect, but to be beautiful. He is the perfecting force. So when you look at your garden sometimes and you put all this work in, and the plants and the herbs and everything doesn't look the way you thought it would. None of them seem perfect. You don't see the perfect rose as you saw it in the catalog, but it's beautiful. And so I ask you again, what need has the Lord asked of you? Don't be surprised that he's asking a need of you in all the imperfections and all the pain and all the sorrow, all the weaknesses. No matter how you feel about it, know that it is for your providence. God cares about you that much. He is Jehovah Jireh. Trust him. Shalom, shalom. God bless you.